Here they all are. Um, Welcome. Happy Pride. It is June 26th. This is the third year in a row that we've been doing this panel for Pride. And if you are wondering why we're doing this panel at all, it's because we are here with Do the Work. If you're unfamiliar with Do the Work, we are an organization that spans all over the country, working to create better representation and general life for folks who are queer working in marketing and advertising, and also who are represented in marketing and advertising. My name is Aria Davachi. I am the programming director here at Do the Work. As I said, this is the third year that I've been hosting this panel, and I'm very excited to be joined by our guests. Obviously, no Pride comes and goes without its good, its bads, its uglies, its slays. And so this year, we're going to do something just a little bit differently. We're not only going to focus on this month, we're going to talk about the year so far, everything under the sun that has occurred in the last 6 months as it relates to the LGBTQ stories in marketing and advertising. So as I said, I am the programming director. My name is Aria. I am coming to you live from Los Angeles. My pronouns are he, him. I identify as a gay man. That's my gay job. My day job is I am the head of experiential at the Spring Hill Company. Been here for over a year, working on all of our experiences across all of our multitude of brands and business units. And I'm super excited to be joined by these three folks today, particularly someone who else sits on the court of Do the Work with me. I'm going to toss it over to her first, and that is Nick. Nick, can you tell everybody your day job, gay job, where you are, how you identify, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So Nick Allum, I'm based in sunny West Hollywood, she, her. My day job is I'm founder of the consultancy Cultureland, which, as the name would suggest, focuses on cultural anthropology, strategy, and creative direction. And my gay job is I'm creative director of Do the Work.
Amazing. Thank you for being here. So excited to hear from you and to chat with you today. Colin, I'm going to go to you next. Tell the folks a bit about yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Colin Daniels. I'm here in New York. Pronouns he, him, his. My day job is I'm the digital editor at Adweek and host of the Young Influentials podcast. Gay job is gay icon, your favorite artist, your dream girl's dream girl.
Amazing. Thank you for being here. Johnnie, I'm going to come to you last but certainly not least. Tell the folks a bit about yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Johnnie Ingram. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a gay man. My day job is a producer, television show creator, creative director, writer, director. My gay job is I executive produced and co-created the show We're Here on HBO. For those of you who may have not seen it, which I hope you will watch, is to take three drag queens into small conservative towns, and we put on a local show and opens up hearts and minds and tells stories of rural queer America. I'm super proud of it. We're in our 4th season and just wrapped up for just before Pride Month. So yeah, love making the show. That's my gay job, so to speak.
If anyone here has not seen We're Here, like immediately following this,
Yourself a favor.
Yeah, that's your immediate next step, call to action. So as I said, we're doing things a little differently this year. I don't just want to talk about the last 26 days, and we will certainly spend some time talking about the last 26 days. But I would love to talk about the last 6 months a bit. And I asked each of you to come prepared with probably what you would consider the best thing. Best is completely subjective and entirely uniquely yours and probably baked into your identity and how you experienced it. But I would love to hear from you each on what you think the best thing related to LGBTQ folks and marketing so far this year has been. Johnnie, I'm going to toss this back to you first. What do you have for us?
Well, I mean, maybe mine will be a little controversial. I don't know. I think the best thing is that people are making mistakes. And I say that, I don't think, people, a lot of times we can ridicule and criticize folks for making mistakes, but I do find that when people are making an effort, they don't always do it right. But when they're making a mistake, they're going to hopefully learn from that mistake. And I know we do hold these brands in particular, especially brands, accountable for those mistakes. And I think we can at times be a little harsh but give people a little bit of moment to reflect, which I think can sometimes end up on the right side of history, and progress does happen from those mistakes. And so I really do think there is beauty in those errors.
I want to ask a follow-up question because
Sure.
I'm with you. Making mistakes is important. I mean, listen, I work in experiential, like we make mistakes all the time, and like that's inevitable. Like always being in beta is one of my like tenets of my work. But that's really challenging, in my opinion, in this day and age when it comes to things like, you know, LGBTQ representation and, you know, anything that's going on into the world. People don't take the beat, as you mentioned, to like educate and improve. We kind of run straight to canceling people, you know, doxing people, whatever that might be. And so I'm wondering on your end, and I'm sure you've worked with people who've gone through that experience. And I'm wondering, you know, how do you weigh the scales of that, right? Like, because we all know the value in making mistakes, but we also, I think, all recognize now the incredible disaster zone that you walk into when you make a mistake and how your career can maybe not even return from that. I mean, I'm just wondering how you feel about the culture as it pertains to mistake making.
Well, I mean, we're human beings and we react. And I think we're now with social media specifically. And I think as we react, everyone's reacting in real time and projecting that into, you know, their feelings directly onto their social media, which can be, you know, like you were saying, cancel culture or doxing folks. It can get a very, we can become very harsh on ourselves just on our initial emotional reactions. We all have I have emotional reactions as well. But I do think if you think long term past the emotional reaction into the reflection portion, and then into what can we do next? How can we continue to push? I mean, especially as during Pride Month, which is a perfect example, it's a time to sort of reflect and look at how can we, you know, bring our culture, our community back into on the right side of history, and to continue to have important conversations about inclusivity, especially specifically this Pride. I think the trans community is under attack. The drag community is under attack. Like, how can we have thoughtful conversations so that doesn't happen again? I mean, it is happening. It's definitely, you know, a hard, tough pill to swallow. And I think there's, you know, obviously some tough conversations to be had. But I do think on the flip side of that is progress, because we are actively having a conversation about it, when sometimes having no conversation is not progress at all.
Totally. I want to bring Colin and Nick on this a bit, because it does feel pertinent to both of their actual individual works as well. But as like someone who works in an anthropological sort of space of culture, and then someone who works in, you know, media, I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts on, like, are we as a queer community creating space for mistakes? Do you think that we do that well, Nick?
I do, and I think when we do it spectacularly. And I think there's a quote from some writer somewhere that said, if you're going to fail, fail spectacularly, you know. Or you can look at it as, I didn't fail, I just tried multiple times to do it. And I think that's what we've always had at the core of our community, fail upward. And the great thing is now that there is more amplification around those mistakes, and they can be gorgeous creative mistakes. And the fact that we're open and honest about it, I think, is what makes progress happen, is that we have a readily available resource to each other of so many things that we can look at and say, that worked, that didn't, you know, this is what I could have done better. And we're having that discourse online and in person. So absolutely.
Colin, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say like within the community, and as like looking at it from a brand side, I feel like more brands are noticing. I feel like there's still a long way and more work they can do. I feel a lot of them are like, okay, we've kind of been blanketing Pride, or we've been blanketing things, and it's time for us to open it up and see like how we can do long-term ways and do it in a more authentic way. And I feel like we're now seeing more being receptive, being like, hey, like we know we've messed up in the past, like who are some organizations or what are some ways we can do this in a more authentic manner? And I feel like I'm starting to hear those conversations more openly versus like behind the scenes, and just like little like one-on-ones or and like DI chats or stuff. I feel like companies as a whole are like, hey, like through our social images, like what are some ways we can make it more like LGBTQ plus inclusive? Like I feel like everybody's like now being like, okay, like we made the mistakes, but we want to like learn from it and actually like you guys give us honest feedback. And I feel like everybody now is like, all right, like starting with this or this material, and they're trying to like actually like take notes and really do better.
Sure. Yeah.
Or it's
Colin,
just, or
go
it's
ahead.
just a great read.
Yeah.
If nothing
That
else.
part too, that part too. We love a good shade throw with our sunglasses on to protect us.
Colin, I'm going to stay with you. What would you say is the best thing that has happened this year as it relates to LGBTQ folk and marketing?
I'd say like I feel like I'm seeing a lot more businesses like be intentional with organizations they're working with in alignment. So like instead of the typical like 3 organizations that a lot of brands might work with, I've seen a lot of them be like, oh, we're gonna team up with like an out veterans association or one focused on like LGBT youth. I feel like I'm seeing more and more brands actually do homework and like go beyond just the typical ones, the mainstream ones that a lot of us see, but focus on ones in like smaller towns or like ones that are like up and coming and doing like smaller work and try to be more intentional with it and not just do like a typical 1 month partnership and be like, did it. Here's some purple for you guys, but actually figure out like how can we team up or how can we work alongside this organization year round beyond it? Because I know like whenever I'm looking to spotlight a brand or a collaboration or a partnership for Pride or beyond, I'm like, okay, is this going beyond the 30 days or is this something that you guys are like just trying to like be like, look, we did it? And I'm like, no. So I feel like I'm seeing more and more intentional ones and ones that are like actually starting to do their homework and find other organizations besides the big ones.
Yeah, I wonder, going back to what you had mentioned briefly earlier too, around we're having these conversations outside of the DE and I zone, right? And I wonder if that's what it is. I think Nick and I and everyone that do the work so often talk about when we see things, you're like, was there a queer person in the room? I think what you're pointing at is that like there now maybe are queer people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Am I assuming, or is that part of what you're pointing at?
I'm like seeing that now more like, for instance, I was just doing an interview and I was like, hey, I'd love to chat about like how you guys are like spotlighting LGBT inclusivity like year round. And they're like, wait, before we move any further, like we need to make sure someone is represented. Like they're like, hey, I'm just an ally, or like, hey, I don't identify. Like, let's make sure you're having input from someone who actually is, so we're not misaligned. And so I'm hearing more and more do that, like with conversations for me personally when I'm doing interviews, but like, hey, I'm not, but let me go find someone who is and bring them in the room. So I'm seeing more and more like admit that versus like, sure, like that sounds good. And I'm like, babes, like what? So I feel like that's like a good positive step that I've been seeing a lot do this year whenever I'm bringing up that question or asking about like different initiatives and stuff like that.
That's amazing. That's good to hear. That warms my cold gay heart. Nick, certainly last but not least, tell us what your favorite thing is, please.
I've got a few.
Yes.
So obviously from my POV, I'm looking at how cultural moments and progress in culture has potentials for branding, marketing, and entertainment. And there've been a lot. There's a lot of good stuff to talk about, and I'll whip through a few. So, 3 winners of the Big Four in the Grammys are queer women. That was followed up immediately at Coachella with queer women just dominating the lineup and the response to their performances. Then you've got in the non-binary and transgender area, you've got very recently Gottmik's top surgery runway look, which was a statement on so many different levels. And then over in Europe, but part of gay culture, Nemo became the first ever non-binary winner of the Eurovision Song Contest, and at the same time called out the organizers for actually banning the non-binary flag, which they were wearing at the time. Crazy. Getting onto more of the kind of heavy geek thing, queer tech is really rising as a category for dating apps, online mental health platforms, and VR experiences. And then brilliantly, Discord have explicitly banned misgendering and dead naming. And then finally, as an uber geek moment, the fact that Star Wars The Acolyte has just come out, which is directed by a lesbian, and has the first ever non-binary and trans woman lead characters in the show. So there's a lot to look at there. There's a lot of inspiration there for brands and agencies. There's a lot to look at and say, wow, that is a leap in progress. It's a quantum leap. So if that's happening over there, we need to catch up.
Yeah. I wanna put a pin and like pull out on the queer tech, because I think as a gay white man, it's been dating apps, babe. Like that's all we've had is like it's been Grindr, it's been all these things, and I'm so intrigued. Do you feel like we are now reaching that moment where tech folks are realizing that we're more than that and that we have more to, and can you talk a bit about that realization and how you're kind of seeing that come to life?
Yeah, I mean, one of the areas just in terms of I guess more the software than the hardware. I mean, gaming, as in GAYMING, gaming, is exploding. And the inclusion of queer characters in game stories, in the way that characters interact with each other, you know, that's a specific example of technology being adapted for a queer narrative. Then beyond dating apps, yes, you've got things like BetterHelp that went very much squarely after the LGBTQ community, but you know, aside from some of the challenges they've had out there in the public arena, what it has spawned and what I'm starting to see the rise of is more and more very specific mental health apps for the queer community. I think on the dating app thing, there is so much untapped space for lesbian and bi and non-binary dating specifically and in and of themselves. And, you know, it's a slightly coy and a little bit, you know, cynical play on words. But if you think of there's gold in them, their hills, you know, and flip it the other way around, you know, it is an opportunity. And certainly as a queer woman, I'd love to see more lesbian dating apps, you know, pansexual, bisexual. So yeah, huge white space there. And I think queer tech as a storytelling mechanic and a basis of cultural strategy, but also business strategy, is ripe for development. And you know, I'm tracking a few different things at the moment. Nothing that is kind of jumping out in terms of leading the way, but certainly that discourse is happening on the Discords and the Reddits and developer forums, where more and more queer, non-binary and trans people as developers are coming into the conversation and saying, well, why isn't this? This is just, how is there not this yet? Is
right.
generally the tone and tenor of those conversations. And then when you add to that all of these collectives that are working on, you know, whether it's blockchain, whether it's decentralized organizations coming together and saying, well, this is something that's just a no-brainer to get together and solve, you know, it's a really exciting time, I think, for queer tech.
We made I didn't mention this at the top, we made an entire television show called Swiping America, which is a queer inclusive television show about, it's more of a, we call it a romantic documentary, but it was about the process of selection, in particular through dating apps. And it was interesting to see like queer folks looking for love next to straight folks looking for love, and sort of the differences that in how we approach love, but also just how there's so much similarities in the conversation around love. But I do believe there is a huge opportunity for the trans and non-binary community specifically. Well, I just think in this particular season, it really does show, you know, that, you know, well, it shows more in particular how challenging it is to find love through tech, but at the same time, you know, how we have changed and evolved as humans to select our future partner. And I think that was a really interesting, it was a fun project to be able to create, and it's on Max. We actually were nominated for a Critics' Choice Award and a GLAAD Award for it.
Amazing. Yeah, you really buried the lead on that, Johnnie. Where was that earlier, Johnnie? Glad we got to bring it up. I think that's enough. Everyone who was going to watch We're Here, add that to the list when you walk away. All right, we gotta pivot to the worst, right? We've talked about the best. Now we gotta talk about the worst. Um, what we're gonna cut, if you will. Colin, I want to come to you first. Talk to me about the bad. What was bad?
I like, so starting with, I feel like this year, every like majority of brands just did not push their pride initiatives. And behind closed doors, I would like in interviews with various brands, I would be like, hey, like, what are we doing? What are we thinking? And so many are like, honestly, we're pigeonholed. We're like scared to make the mistakes that a lot of people did last year, and we don't know what to do. And I feel like that's such a horrible excuse, because I've talked to a number of brands this year who have done it authentically for numerous years. And I'm like, you can't hide, we can't just keep hiding behind the, oh, we're scared to mess up or make the same mistake that that brand did. It's like, no, like, and we're scared of the backlash that like other people might give us. And I'm like, you can't hide behind that. Everybody's gonna hate what you're like, not everybody's gonna like you, and you can't use that excuse for whatever, because like, does our dollars not matter? Like, what message are you sending with that by saying that, like, oh, we're scared? Like, how do you think we feel? Like that's not, I'm like, if you want to have that conversation, let's go all the way there. It's like, that's a horrible excuse. I
What's
feel like
the
that
message you
whole
sending to
that
employees or LGBTQ employees,
exactly. It's like, you're just like, we're scared of, I'm like, yeah, babe, if you tried like walking in our shoes, like, come on. So I feel like that's like my big like upset this year has been everybody being like, we're scared, or like, we don't know, or no, it's just like, no, that's cop out.
Yeah,
The one,
I want to just ask the differentiating. Sorry, Nick, I'll jump back, but I just want to ask, is it more the fear of the mistake or more the fear of the backlash?
I've heard when I've asked brands personally this year, both, they've said both. Like, they're like, oh, we're scared of like getting hate on like social media, and or like, oh, we're scared of like we just don't want to mess it up. So like, they'll say both when I like push and be like, that doesn't really make sense, or that's a cop out. And I like give an example of a brand who's like doing it well, and they're like, oh, well, like, we're not them. And it's just like, I'm like, okay, like, no. Like, no, like, I'm sorry. That just
Yeah.
doesn't work for me.
Nick, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say the central image that's been in my head looking at all of this stuff, Colin, is of a rocking horse, right? A rocking horse is in motion, but it's not making progress. And that's where we're at. We've had this, up and down for a few years, and now it's just come to a standstill, basically.
Exactly. It's ridiculous.
And it's also really scary, no? Like I find that to be really frightening. Like obviously because I sit on the court of Do the Work, who is trying to create as much honest and fantastic representation as possible, but also just as a queer person, I'm like, well, that's not right. And like we wouldn't be here if we didn't fight a little. So we got to fight a little more.
Well, that, I want to, maybe I'll build off of that. I mean, I think there is, our show covers this season. We particularly chose, in some ways to take a huge risk. And, our show is about bringing joy and love to communities, but this season we faced the culture war head on. And I think one of the worst things that is happening are these headlines, these instant reaction headlines that are just everywhere you look. I think that's part in due to that a lot of publications are struggling, to survive, and these clickbait headlines are really helping, get at least viewers, so to speak, on their articles. But at the same time, they're creating a real sort of it's a real fear-based, reactions to these headlines. In particular, what we do this season is we have an entire town in Oklahoma that before going in, we found some wonderful LGBTQ human beings that wanted to do drag and tell their story, and they quietly started doing the same things. Brands are pulling back. We had completely, like, any business in this town in Oklahoma said we could not film there, and it's kind of in a similar reaction to what had happened in a previous Pride event. There was a lot of backlash, a lot of folks online and showed up in person, and was also quietly targeting these businesses, saying, if you host a drag brunch, if you host a drag night, we're going to come after you. And I think there's this real illusion of this small group of conservative folks, I call it the man behind the curtain, that are organized and they're mass commenting, if not pure bots, on brands, on I mean, if you look at HBO, if you look at any of our posts on HBO social media, it is wild. The comments are wild. But I mean, if you really, really look at them, it looks like it's AI bots that somebody has purchased to
Right.
spread this.
Mhm.
So the illusion of this whole thing is that I feel like there's like 5 really ultra conservative folks that are really well organized, and they're going from place to place to place to place to create this fear, just hopefully stop our community from progressing. And I think what we expose in particular this season, and I hope those of you who have watched, is you see when we show up and we are loud and we take the megaphone back, literally, it's literally like I think 3 guys showed up when we actually did an event in the same town. We had permission to only film on the streets based on our First Amendment rights. They're legal rights. We could only film on the sidewalk and in one public park. So we organized a meet and greet, and everybody showed up. Not all the people that were afraid, didn't show up. The folks that were spreading hate, it was 2 guys with a megaphone. When you see them, when you expose them, you're like, really, this is what we're afraid of? It's not that scary. So I think that's where we have to get brands and folks that are reacting to these headlines in particular, and to the fear of making mistakes or the backlash, to say there's nothing to be afraid of. It's okay to make mistakes. You know, you will learn from them. Ultimately, you will be a better person. Ultimately, you know, inclusivity is a reflection of your brand, but also your organization, the people that work for you. And I think that we just need to get over this hump. And I do believe if we organize and bring the megaphones back, we will.
That's very well said. Nick, I want to come to you. What was the bad?
Yeah, well, to build on what Johnnie was just saying, I think a fantastic but awful example of that is Best Buy, who allowed a element of their shareholder group to dictate basically how the brand treats LGBTQ community, specifically trans people. And they actually used the terminology, I'm looking at it here, predatory butchers, to describe LGBTQ organizations. And they demanded proof that Best Buy had ceased contributions to the Trevor Project, Our Gay History in 50 States, GLAAD, Glisten, Gender Cool, It Gets Better, Centrelink LGBTQ Center. I mean, it's just jaw-dropping, gobsmackingly extraordinary. And you know, you're saying 2 guys and a megaphone, that's what it is. It's a small group of people that are just exceptionally good at the message and repeating it and shouting it louder and louder and louder and louder and louder.
I mean, they're not scared. They're not scared.
They're not scared. And it's always said, you know, that Republicans and Republican leaning are kind of German precision in terms of their message and getting it out there and embedding it in the minds of Americans, whereas Democrats, you know, tend to sometimes be a little bit of you know, the Keystone Cops in that regard, because there's too many things to talk about. Right. But with that in mind, I think, you know, added to that there was a Wall Street Journal piece that came out about a month ago that says that now 9 in 10 executives believe taking a stance on social issues is riskier than staying silent. I mean,
I just full-heartedly disagree. I just like, I don't know. Like, and listen, like, I'm not a strategist, like I'm a producer, but like I kind of hear that, and I'm wondering if how you feel, Colin, Johnnie. Like, I can't help but be like, that feels obviously wrong.
No, like Nick, I've actually had various like brand like owners, CEOs and stuff tell me the exact thing. They're like, we don't feel like it's necessary for the brand to speak up about X, Y, and Z things. Like the brand needs to just talk about the cool UGC, cool projects we're doing. And if something serious, like we'll post something from our social, but it's not the brand's responsibility. Like I've had more and more say that to me within the last year. And I'm just like, the math's not mathing like that.
Well,
That doesn't make sense.
if the brand wants to cease to exist, that's a great strategy to continue on that path. Because I mean, I think eventually these brands are going to be held accountable because I mean, if anything, we're in the age of information, and this is all being documented, and eventually all this information is going to be coming at us through AI and any on demand, and we're going to be able to find, oh, should I walk into this store and buy anything before? Oh, actually, I just learned a lot about their representation in LGBTQ community and how they, and then you're going to decide right there on the spot whether or not I should buy anything from the stores. I think you're going to be held accountable at some point for your actions, and I think there is a real thoughtful approach in inclusivity, and I don't think you have to go out and have a political response to everything, but I do believe that through nurture and in collaboration with the LGBTQ community and hiring LGBTQ folks, especially trans folks, please hire trans folks, and that you'll come out the other side more knowledgeable, a bigger, better brand, and very successful. I mean, if you look at Gen Z and the amount of Gen Z that identifies as LGBTQ, that should be enough information for you there.
Right. Like that tidal wave is coming. Like it's sort of inevitable.
Well, the tap dance that's happening as well is you can't say you don't want to get involved and you want to sit out the cultural strategy wars. Like you've always been in the cultural strategy wars. Like you use the language of war, running up the flagpole, all of that. You've got Coke versus Pepsi, Burger King versus McDonald's. Like it's fine with segmentation when it's on your terms, but when it's something that's vitally important to a rising generation and a massive amount of buying power, it's crazy. And also you can't say, well, we want to touch, every part of people's lives and be embedded in their, in their cultures, in their values, and then sit it out, which I've seen so many times. We're sitting this one out. It's ludicrous.
I agree. I wanna take a slight right turn. I want to turn inward, if you will. Let's talk about Pride. Let's talk about the last 26 days. I think we've covered enough, and now we've earned the conversation to talk about Pride. And I really want to just have the honest conversation of like, how was your Pride? How is your Pride? It's still happening. And I would love to hear from you in terms of your own specific identity and how you walk through this world. And I'll go first to just set the table nicely. I live in Los Angeles. I work at a predominantly very young company. And it's been really wonderful internally, and like had a really good time of like people feeling like they wanted to be a part of something, even though I know they don't have queer friends. And like, that's totally cool. Like, I don't expect integration at that level. But I do expect respect and like joy around like, we're going to do something for Pride. And I felt like this year I saw a lot of people who I just normally would not have thought to see in the space being like, yeah, let's go make signs. Like, yeah, let's go do this. Let's go do this. And that might be because I'm a pushy queen, but like, I think there is a bit of like more of interest of like, yeah, this is the time to do this. This is the time to do this. Of course, I would love to see more public brand action and more public action in general, just like more for trans rights and for non-binary like realities. But yeah, that's sort of been my 2 minutes on Pride. Johnnie, I'm going to come to you first. How has your Pride been?
I mean, I am so grateful, and I have to say, I feel so much hope and optimism going in this Pride Month. I feel really great. Having been, like I said, on the front lines of the culture war and I've experienced some of the negative things. At the same time, I've simultaneously seen people and the change happening. People in these small towns, these small communities who I'm now very connected to, starting and throwing their own Pride events and standing up. And Pride is a protest this year, but it still is lots of queer joy. And I think the protest and queer joy culminating together and seeing these Pride events happening in smaller and smaller and smaller communities, I just feel that what happened at one point on the coast or in large cities is now happening in these small communities, and I mean, we're on this giant cruise ship of a country, but it's tilting towards, I see towards good greatness, and especially for our community. I think I was sent this article twice yesterday about this. I think this guy in Idaho who was on the Washington Post article, who threw his own hometown pride in the face of all the backlash and the hate, and he did it, and it was fantastic. And I'm seeing more of these stories happening, and I think that is really so exciting, and I'm just so proud and happy to be here and to be a part of it all and to be a gay man.
Same, girl. I'm happy too. Colin, I'm going to come to you next. How's your Pride been?
It's been good. I feel like every Pride I like to focus and hone in on like the history and just like how far we come, where we're going. And I feel like through all the different events and charitable things I've been volunteering with, everybody's kind of been adamant about like highlighting the more facets of it. So like there was a really cool one that I did with Stonewall Gives, where they brought in this really cool Native American drag queen trope, where they were like sharing the history about like two spirits and people just being really open and receptive to understanding, being like, hey, like there's more beyond just like what we're doing in New York, but like there's communities in Oklahoma, Texas, others that like this matters. And I feel like years ago, like people used to be like, why do you still care about like what's going on in like the South? There are places like, we're in New York, we're good. And I'm like, like this isn't everybody's reality. Like some people are still getting kicked out of their home for like being non-binary, being trans, like getting killed. Like I'm like, this isn't like the coasts aren't like our everyday life. So I feel like more and more people throughout the different events I went to this year were like, oh, like I need to like tune in to see like what they're doing in Nashville, what they're doing in like other parts of Tennessee. Like how can we help like these smaller orgs, or how can we like do more? So I feel like I've been really good to kind of like overhear and like see that more and more people are like, oh, there's more beyond LA and New York. Like how can we help the other like cities and other surrounding like states?
Yeah, that's great. Nick.
Yeah, I'm going to speak about Pride on a local level rather than a macro level. So Pride WeHo being, you know, historically a center of Pride, a very out there forward. It was discombobulating this year. And as a queer woman, there was this kind of rising vibe of this idea of who's a straight woman, who's a queer woman, you know, and you're invading our spaces as men. That was just an undercurrent, and it's certainly a discourse that's going on online as well. Added to which, you know, that there has been over the past couple of years the wake of this idea of straight women and allies using queer spaces as safe spaces, and then straight men coming in and identifying, and there's roofing and all that kind of stuff going on. So that again was kind of at the belly of the beast. More than that, and I guess the main thing that I was observing is that, you know, WeHo is small bars. It is. We don't have, you know, mega clubs. But 3 streets up from Santa Monica Boulevard, people are, you know, they're trying to turn Sunset Strip into Las Vegas, right? And that trickles down to Santa Monica Boulevard where Pride happens. And it did have this kind of vibe that it was turning into Bourbon Street at Mardi Gras, or like Fort Lauderdale spring break kind of thing, because you literally could not move. You could not move for the whole strip. So you know, and we estimated, my group of friends, that like if you were lining up to go to a bar, that it would take you like 3 hours to get into the bar. Then you'd have to line up for another hour to get a drink. So that's 4 hours out of your time just to, yeah. So it was this kind of felt crowded, and added to which that WeHo is also becoming a gawking tourist destination for TMZ buses, you know. Look at all the gays, people in there.
It's a blend of look at all the gays and like look at Lisa Vanderpump. Okay, but well, I want to throw this in because I think there is an interesting dichotomy, because I didn't go to WeHo Pride. I went to LA Pride in Hollywood. And where it is in Hollywood, it's on Hollywood Boulevard, not my favorite place, but there are no bars. It is, you are sitting, like the Rose Parade. You're standing on the sidewalk and the parade happens. And I will say within the first hour, I kind of looked at my friends. I was like, well, this feels kind of weird. We're not drinking. We're just here clapping. Doesn't really feel like Pride. It feels different. And so I wonder, there's a weird, I think you're pointing at something very true about what's happening to WeHo that's happened to the Castro, that will probably happen to it probably happened to Key West already. But I do think that the dichotomy of when you start to pull out from that and it starts to become different in these major cities, it is discombobulating in a different way.
Yeah,
and sort of all right, go ahead, Johnnie.
No, I live in WeHo, and we did Pride in the Park. The drag performers did Pride, which I had never been to LA Pride, and I did that Pride in the Park, and I thought, wow, this is honestly, I've had the best time. It wasn't what you were saying at all, Nick, and I get a little nervous in these large crowded events, so I didn't. That's the reason why I didn't actually attend WeHo Pride, because it made me a little. I just get I don't do well in large crowds.
Right.
And I can see how that can be a little, but I have to say too, we are lucky to have a place in Palm Springs with my partner, and I love Palm Springs Pride because it's small and it's adorable, and it's like families on the street and everyone's just, waving pride flags, and there's not a lot of, corporate sponsorship giant, but not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just, for me, it just has this real different flavor of pride. And so maybe there is it Find Your Pride? I don't know where is the place that fits your, your personal taste. I know a lot of people really love. I mean, I would love to see Kylie Minogue. I still haven't seen.
Well, I was just about to say.
But I just did not want to. I can't root through that crowd to see Kylie Minogue. I want to see Kylie Minogue when I have a seat, maybe in Vegas. Here she's going on tour, or something like that. But I can see how I would not have. I also don't drink a lot, and I don't think Pride has to be that.
And you raise a fantastic point there, Johnnie, because we're of a similar age group. I had a lot of people, similar age groups around me, and there was a lot of discussion around, when people want to enjoy Pride, but they don't want to be queuing at a bar for 4 hours to go crazy and dance on the podiums and all the rest of it. Like, what is the I'm not going to use crappy words like the adult Pride or the, not going to go there, but it's like, what is the mellow Pride? What does that look like? Is that an opportunity?
This is Pride, to have these discussions, I wish we had a little parade moment in boxes, but it is, for me, it's being at some point, I was younger, I loved being in those spaces and was looking for love, and found a lot of that. And then finally found my person and was able to, sort of, I feel like now give back, and being able to carry voices and build the stage to tell stories and listen to other people's stories. And, in particular, I think that LGBT Center and queer youth in particular, that's a very big issue in large cities, which is one of the original inspirations for our show, was that 40% identify as LGBTQ youth, because they're often escaping these smaller communities and trying to come to the city where they think they can live authentically, and it's too expensive, and you end up on the streets, or you meet the wrong crowd and get tied up in the wrong, or just anything can happen. But I think, applying Pride into those areas where we can uplift the folks that, really need our help, for me, gives me great joy. And I love the parade and I love the spirit of it, but again, I don't need to sit in line in a bar and drink. I'd rather do something that brings me joy internally, and that is things like that.
Couldn't agree more.
We've got one more question, and I'm going to ask everybody to be very succinct in terms of time. Which is, we've got half a year left. What does the community need the back half of this year to look like in terms of representation, marketing, things happening in the world? What does the community need most? Colin, I'm going to come to you first.
Ooh, like when I thought you were gonna ask like what's the word, and I was gonna say solidarity.
We'll take it. That's great.
Okay, yeah, I'll put that. Yeah, because I think we need everybody to like kind of come together and be like, let's take a stand. And you can't be like, oh, I'm scared of what this is gonna think. Like, if you're trying to appear, if you're trying to appeal to everyone, you're talking to no one, which is
Yes.
what I always say. So I'm like, there's plenty of brands where like, this is where we're gonna stand, and if you don't like us, like, go somewhere else. So I think like it's really important for you can't be like we're sitting this one out. Like we need to come together because it's not just like a joke. Like people are losing rights left and right, and like we are under attack. And I think it's so important for us to like stand together, and we have to like be a unit.
Thank you. That's very well said. I liked your word. Johnny, I'm going to come to you next. You don't necessarily have to have a word, but if you have a word now, Nick, get ready. I'm asking for a word. Johnny, what do you got? What does the community need?
I have a lot of words. It is very much grab the megaphone back. We are stronger in numbers. It's not about, we often hang out in silos. I always used to say I'm just a G and a BLT, but to really get everyone together. And, part of our show is what drag is sort of very disarming, also very entertaining. And it's sort of our art form that brings folks together, which is why I think it's so important, and maybe why people are so afraid of it. But to really bring the megaphone back and get off your phones, get out into the real world and make a difference, because it's not happening by posting memes.
No.
Those days are over. It's doing nothing. And AI is coming. It's already here, and you're never going to win against that meme war online. But if you're outside actively knocking on doors, talking to folks, sitting down, having conversations, volunteering, whatever you can do, gathering the L's, the B's, the G's, the D's, the Q's together, because we are forced to be reckoned with. And come November, there's going to be a lot of brands saying, wow, I wish I had joined that group. And I also think there's still a lot of time for brands. This doesn't have to happen during Pride Month. There's a lot of opportunities for inclusivity, whether it's in your campaigns, for employment, whatever it is. And you can still make a huge difference. It doesn't have to exist in the month of June, and it shouldn't. But I do think June is a great time to reflect, to talk, have these conversations, and to progress towards the future.
Thank you. That's very well said. Nick, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd add both of those together and add a bit of build in that, yeah, coming together and helping people realize that the middle ground is a myth. It's just a myth, get off that rocking horse, get into action, because there's money on the table. We've got, I think, 1.4 trillion in spending power. And then there was another stat that was like, by next year, 7 trillion from minority groups as a whole. I mean, follow the money.
And of the 500 or so anti-LGBTQ bills that were, proposed, I think, still horrible. I think only 35 have even made it into.
Right.
So I think if you want some statistics, and those are, we're going to go after those 35, and we're going to stand at stop at nothing for that. But I think it is important. These real numbers can hopefully, if that's really what you need to make a decision, help.
Yeah. Friends, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Happy Pride again. Before we go, I want to give each of you the opportunity to tell folks where they can connect with you or find you. Colin, where can folks connect with you, find you, listen to you, read your words? Tell us.
You can find everything's honestly in the link on my Instagram at COL Meets World. So follow me there and you'll find links to my writing, podcasts, all the above.
Amazing. Thank you again for joining us. Johnnie, where can folks find you? Where can folks watch your work? Remind us.
Yes, well, you can find me at Johnnie Instagram, JOHNNIE. Instagram is a play on words. Back in the day, it really worked. I've really, if you have subscribed to Max, you can see our shows We're Here and Swiping America. And, we're also currently in development, hopefully making your next big hit television show coming soon.
Amazing. Nick, finally, where can folks meet you, know you?
People can find me on LinkedIn. Just look me up in the search bar. It's an unusual name, so easy to find. And you can find me on multiple bits and pieces coming out of Do the Work. We have a quarterly trend report that comes out, and my details are on that, and then through the website as well for Do the Work.
Cannot emphasize enough, if you need anything that you think Do the Work can help you with, please reach out to us. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to Nick, Graham, Kate, anyone else who's on the court. We are an organization that is here to help and to make change. And no matter what you're looking for, if we are not the people to help you, we know the right people who to help you. So thank you so much for coming and spending time with us. Happy Pride. And folks on the panel, thank you so much for engaging in such a thoughtful, lively, and fun conversation.
Thank you.
So good to be here. Happy Pride.
Pride, folks. Talk to you soon. Thank you.